thank you so much. So I'm trying something new today because I wanted to be able to sort of look at you and talk to you while I'm presenting. So, innovation loves constraints, and we're certainly constrained by the current situation globally. If you think about Google, whenever you go to a Google web page, right, you type in on average around 3 words. Google goes through trillions of websites and gives you a recommendation list in milliseconds. Sitting behind that, you have AI. And also sitting behind that, you have an immense compute, but also immense operations and knowledge around how to operate those models, right? You never go to google.com and it says, oh, it's down for maintenance, right? It has to be up all the time. And the models that sit behind that are constantly being refreshed. So while the title of this is How AI is Changing Enterprises, you could just as easily call this, How Enterprises are Changing AI. So if we take a look at Google, right, certainly we've been working on AI, and we're probably more famous for the work on AI that we've been doing with DeepMind, right? So playing games like Go and StarCraft. But there's a lot of more useful things that are happening with AI. So driverless cars is an example, right? And in fact, Waymo, our autonomous car division, has driven more than 8 million miles on public roads at a rate of around 25,000 miles a day. To put this in a little bit of perspective, the company with the second largest number of miles is Uber, with 3 million miles, right? So 8 million miles of autonomous driving versus 3 million miles driven by all of Uber, right? So it's a lot of data that we need to be able to process and a lot of new models that we have the ability to create. Of course, sitting behind Google Search, you have AI, but then you have very simple things like autocomplete, which also uses AI now behind the scenes. And to give you some indication, it saves people about 25% of their time whenever they're searching using autocomplete. We've been working a lot on AI, right? So if you take a look at, as I said, 25% time, but cumulatively, that means we save over 200 years of typing time every day. So 200 years every day. And of course, there's Google Home, right, where we're selling 5.5 million speakers every single quarter. But we're not the only ones, right? So enterprises are now starting to adopt AI technologies. And if we take a look at next year, in 2021, 75% of enterprise applications will be using AI, right? This transformation is happening very, very quickly. 10% of new vehicles will have autonomous capabilities. Now, most of those vehicles will be sort of in controlled environments, such as farming and mines. And the number of citizen data scientists will have grown 5 times faster than professionals. And this is due to the democratization of the tools that are available. Right? Artificial intelligence is no longer purely in the scope of researchers. This is now available to anyone to use. So enterprises that are investing in building industry-specific AI solutions are proven to be better positioned as future global economic leaders. So what we're really talking about here is the ability for AI to actually have an effect on businesses and enterprises doing useful things with AI. In short, many believe, as we do, that the enterprises that invest in building these solutions are positioning themselves for the leaders, economic leaders of tomorrow. All right, so what is driving cloud AI growth, or more specifically, cloud AI growth for enterprises? The first of all is flexibility, right? So you now have the ability to run these things hybrid. So you're no longer locked into a certain framework. You don't have to hand code these models. There are lots of ways to automate these models through things like open source things, tools such as TensorFlow and PyTorch. And you have this huge amount of scalability through the use of cloud compute. There's also an increasing focus on users. And I think this year in particular, you're seeing a huge focus on users. As consumer behaviors change, enterprises need to focus a lot more on those changes and need to meet their customers where they're at. And the rapid change that has impacted enterprises through the pandemic needs to be reacted to quickly. So that focus on users is extremely important. Number 3 is innovation. So Jeff Dean did a quick calculation on the back of a napkin in the early days of Google's use of AI or deep machine learning models around voice recognition. And at the time, he realized that if every Android user talked to their phone for about 2 minutes every single day, that Google would run out of compute resources. Of course, a lot's changed since then. Models have gotten a lot better, but also the way that we compute has gotten a lot better. And I'll actually spend most of the time today talking about some of those innovation changes. And the last one, which we've heard actually a lot about today as I've been listening to the other sessions, is around that responsibility. So being trusted to run AI, being trusted with that data, making sure that that data is secured, and also a level of transparency, not just around the security, but also around how that data is used and the explainability of those models. And again, there's a lot of innovation that's happened in those spaces on the software side to make that a lot easier to do. If we take a look at who can actually use AI today, most of the users that are there are business users. However, the tools that were available just a few years ago weren't accessible to those users. Right? It really stayed in the domain of the deep learning researchers or the machine learning experts. Now we see a change in the tools. And if we take a look at sort of the level of ML expertise that's required, yes, there are things that where a high level of ML expertise are required, where you're really dealing with things like machine learning infrastructure. But then there are platforms where you need a little bit less knowledge. And there are also things like, for Google called Cloud Auto ML, which are really sort of transfer learning models where you can supply your own data and labels, and it allows you to have these narrow use case types of solutions. For example, recommendation engines, tabular data, vision models, and language models. So well-known narrow use case spaces where you can just use simple transfer learning along with user-provided data and labels. And then, of course, there are APIs, these pre-trained models that are available from a number of vendors, which allows the 23 million developers to have access to those tools. So you can see that there's a huge amount of democratization with AI and the tooling through the automation of those tools. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the other problem. As I said, Jeff Dean realized that we might be running out of compute. And at that time, Google put a lot of effort into thinking about different ways to scale that compute. And if we take a look at how compute has been done and how training has been done previously, obviously GPUs are a big part of that. And actually just yesterday, Google Cloud launched the A100 GPU on our cloud as well, which is the new Ampere GPU from NVIDIA. But at the same time, Google has been developing its own TPUs, and these were for sort of massive scaling operations around training. So we've looked at things like TPUs, which are tensor processing units, which do matrix multiplication very, very well, but also how to network those together. So we actually have these things called TPU pods, which essentially take 2,048 TPUs through a toroidal network and accelerate the training. Down at the bottom, I've got a link to an article around a new model that we just ran at the end of June. It's a multilingual translation model, which can translate from 100 different languages into English. It uses over 600 billion parameters for that model. Using 2,048 TPU nodes over 4 days, we are able to train that model to a high level of accuracy. In fact, higher level accuracy than other language models we had created before. And this, of course, is through the 600 billion parameters, but also the massive amount of data that we used to train it. So within 4 days, we were able to train a model that would have taken a single TPU 26 years. Now, what's important to note here is that it scales less than linearly, which means essentially by using these larger networks or a larger amount of nodes and distributing that learning across those nodes, it's not just parallelizing the data. It's actually creating a more efficient model by intelligently sharding that data across those TPUs. So there are still some major AI problems that persist today. Number one is use cases. So the first thing that happens when I talk to customers is they ask us what they should be doing with AI, right? Which is the wrong way to think about it. Good AI starts with a good question, and that question needs to come from the business, right? So that business problem has to come from those businesses. But what we've learned from that is that enterprises don't understand how to approach AI or how to even think about how it might be useful in their organizations. Now, of course, that's getting less and less as business people become more familiar with the capabilities of AI, but it's still a problem today. The second one is people, right? Machine learning expertise is scarce. Not everyone understands how to do deep learning, and that's why democratization of these tools and automation of these tools is so important. The next one is that AI is more than just machine learning, right? So we're not building models just for the sake of it. AI is the application of machine learning in order to make intelligent decisions. And then we have deployment and integration. This is probably the biggest thing that we have seen in the past couple of years, which is it's one thing to actually be able to build those models, but how do we productionize those models? How do we operate and compensate for concept drift and data drift? And how do we propagate those new models into production intelligently? So when we looked at our customers, we essentially looked at we found that customers are sort of approaching AI in very different ways. The most common one is, in fact, the tactical use case, right? Where they're actually just trying to solve a very specific problem. Perhaps we even need to step back a little bit and understand where their data is coming from, how the data is collected, understand what their data lake strategy is. The next one is strategic, right? So now they have these machine learning systems in production. They do have centralized coordination through a core analytics team, and they're at a point where their custom models can actually be a source of competitive advantage. And then there's the last one, which is the truly transformational aspects. And this means that they need to be operating in a brand new way. So, I often talk to customers about the fact that, doing old things in a new place really doesn't change or transform your business. So now it's about doing new things in this new place or doing new things with this new technology. So you need the ops, and again, one of the earlier speakers talked about this, the culture aspect, right? So we need to make sure we have a culture of experimentation and a way to model and operate that. And then finally, if you're in a transformational stage, you're actually doing custom research. You're actually building your own models. So while APIs and transfer learning can get you part of the way there, you're actually at a point where you're creating new models for new use cases that are specific for your business or specific for your industry. So whenever we're talking to customers, essentially we look at a few things. We look at these combinations of things: the people and the process, the people and the technology, the people and the data and the technology, the data and the process, and the technology and the process. And these are some samples of the types of questions that we ask whenever we're talking to customers in these spaces. Due to time, because I realize that being in between you and your lunch, you don't need a machine learning model to understand that's a bad place to be. So I won't go through each of these in detail. And in fact, what I'll do instead is provide you a link to this. We do have this model available for free, this framework available for free, to help you understand where you might sit and where you might need to change things, not only from a technology innovation perspective, but also from an operational and scaling perspective. So, what is it that you need to do in order to really embrace artificial intelligence and machine learning operationally? So here you can see sort of those things all tied together. There's a QR code there on the screen, along with a bit.ly link if you wanted to screenshot that or take that down. I really wanted to make sure that you had the ability to get this for free. There's no registration required or anything. This is a direct link to the PDF file, so you can actually download that and go through that yourself and understand how your enterprises might adopt that technology and what they need to do in order to be successful this year and next. Thank you so much for your time. If you do have any questions, please let me know. You can contact me on LinkedIn or through Twitter or through any social channel that you might want to. I'm always available to answer questions. So thank you so much for your time, and I will hand it back over to Shavana. Thank you so much.